Hi everyone, I'm Yunus. Welcome to my channel. In this video, we are going to talk about VPC Endpoint, a method using which the servers in a private subnet can connect with resources which are external to the VPC such as S3, DynamoDB, Systems Manager, etc. So what is a VPC endpoint? Let's understand that. Please consider an EC2 in a private subnet. It cannot access services such as S3 which are actually outside the VPC, and this EC2 doesn't even have a public IP address. So how does it get access to services such as S3? A VPC endpoint is created in a subnet which enables customers to privately connect to the AWS services which are external to VPC such as S3, DynamoDB, SSM, etc. So it is like creating a tunnel from within your VPC up to the location of that particular service. We will try to understand that better. And in this particular case, EC2 will not need public IP or internet connectivity. That is because you have now got a tunnel which starts from within the VPC. So you just need to reach the tunnel starting point, and from there you can travel through the AWS internal network to reach the other AWS service on the other end of the tunnel. Endpoint is supported by a private link. Private link is like the tunnel and endpoint is like the starting point of that particular tunnel. Private link acts like a tunnel which starts from inside the VPC and reaches up to the S3 bucket or any other service. To understand this better, let us take the case of a school. Its campus is divided in two parts on either side of the road. So usually the children will need to cross the road to get to the other side. It is dangerous, isn't it? So to avoid this, you can build a tunnel connecting the two parts of the campus, the tunnel under the road. So here you can see that a tunnel is built under the road and children can actually cross from one side of the campus to the other side through the tunnel. So that is safe for the children. They are not crossing the public road. And a VPC endpoint also works exactly like this. Your private subnet may be on the other side, and on this side you may have your S3 bucket, and you are building what is called this private link, which is like a tunnel. So here VPC endpoint is the entry point to this tunnel, and this tunnel is like the private link. Okay, so you got the difference between the private link and the VPC endpoint. So in case of the school, you may have just one tunnel which connects between the two parts of the campus. But in case of AWS VPC, you can actually have multiple tunnels or multiple VPC endpoints. One may be connecting to the S3 bucket, another one may be connecting to DynamoDB, another one may be connecting to another service. So you can have separate VPC endpoints and separate private links for those connectivity. So that's what is mentioned here. It is like having separate tunnels to reach the library, canteen, school, office on the other side, if you consider the case of school. But usually in case of the school you may have just one tunnel, but in case of AWS VPC endpoint you can have multiple tunnels, one tunnel each for S3 or DynamoDB or SSM. So this is another representation of the same thing. You have your S3 which is outside the VPC, and within VPC you have a private subnet in which you have an application server, a private EC2. This private EC2, the application need to connect with this S3, but this EC2 doesn't even have a public IP address. So how do we do that? So what we will do is we will create a VPC endpoint within this VPC. It could be within this private subnet or it could be in any other subnet of the VPC. It doesn't matter. So in this case, we have created an endpoint which is nothing but the entry point to this tunnel, and this tunnel is the private link. Now the only thing which is remaining is you have to connect from here to here, which is easy because this endpoint will have a private IP address which belongs to the same CIDR range of this VPC. So easily this private EC2 can send a message to this endpoint which has a private IP address which belongs to the same CIDR range. So this is how the VPC endpoint connects with its target. And the traffic between the VPC and a service does not leave the Amazon network. That is the biggest advantage when it comes to the safety of your traffic. And to find out more about VPC endpoint, you can use this link. I will provide this link as part of the video description, but for now I'll just quickly open that and show you. So what are VPC endpoints? You can see there are multiple types of endpoints: interface endpoints, gateway endpoints. What we are talking about is interface endpoints. Gateway endpoints I will discuss about it in another video. So you can read through this document. Let me go back. And now in the next part of this video, I'm going to show you how to create a VPC endpoint. And before I do that, let me show you the lab setup which I'm going to create. So this is what I'm going to create. I will have a VPC, my default VPC. I will have a public subnet and private subnet. So you may wonder why I need to have this public subnet. That is only because I have created this private EC2 in the private subnet. And I will be creating the VPC endpoint for this particular EC2. But the thing is, to issue the AWS CLI commands from this EC2, I need to SSH into this private EC2. For that, I need a Bastion host or gem server. And I have set up this Bastion host in public subnet so that I can SSH to it from my laptop. And from this EC2, I will SSH into my private EC2. And how to SSH from one EC2 to another EC2, I have already created a video. I'll provide the link at the top. You can refer to that. And in any case, I will also provide the steps in my video description or doing this SSH from public EC2 to private EC2. So you can refer to that. So I will have public subnet, one EC2 in that, private subnet, another EC2 in that, and then I have an S3 bucket. And then I will create the VPC endpoint in this private subnet, and I will try to access S3 without the VPC endpoint, and it will fail. And then I will do the same thing after creating the VPC endpoint, and you can see that that command is successful. Okay, so now let's move on to the management console. Okay, we are in the EC2 dashboard, and you can see that there are two instances which are running. And the first one is in the public subnet. You can go to networking and see public IP address, and it is in public subnet. And the second one is a private EC2 which is in the private subnet without any public IP address, private subnet. So basically I'll be using this private EC2 for my lab, but I have created an EC2 in public subnet only because I need a gem box or Bastion host through which I can SSH into this private EC2. Okay, so now let me first log into my Bastion host, click on connect and select this and open a terminal. Okay, so go to the directory where your key pair is stored. For me it is in downloads folder. So from there you issue this command and you will be able to log in. Okay, so you have logged into the Bastion host. From here you have to log into the private EC2. How to SSH from one EC2 to another EC2, I have already created a video. I'll provide the link at the top. Okay, now how do I get the connection string to connect with the private EC2? Go back to your EC2 dashboard and select your private EC2 instance, this one, connect, copy this connection string, go back to your terminal and paste this command. But before you enter, some changes are required because this key pair I have copied it into .ssh folder in the Bastion host. So I need to provide the full path and then enter. Okay, now you are in the private EC2 and from here we will try to access an S3 bucket and we will see how to make it work. So before that, let me change the hostname here. Sudo hostname ctl set hostname private EC2. Exit and come back again. The hostname would have changed. You can see the hostname has changed. Now I need to use AWS CLI for this. So let us see if AWS CLI is already present. AWS version You can see that AWS CLI is already present because this is Amazon Linux 2 which I have used. So it is already there. Now let me see if I can list all my S3 buckets. AWS S3 LS, and this will fail because I haven't configured my access key ID and secret access key. Yeah, unable to locate credentials. So now I need to configure my access key ID, secret access key. From where will I get these two? You can go to your management console, go to security credentials, open link in new tab. Okay, go to AWS IAM credentials and create access key. I already have one, but I want to create a new one, and then I'll delete it once this exercise is done. I'll use it for CLI and confirm, create, description. I'll just say training, create access key. Okay, so I have got the access key and secret access key. So I'll just say show. You can download this and keep it in your downloads folder, but I'm not doing that because I'm going to change it immediately after I create this video. So let me copy access key and then go back to the terminal, and here just do AWS configure and paste the access key ID. Now it requires secret access key. So let me go there, copy this, come back and enter this region. You can give US East 1 and output format, it doesn't matter, JSON or YAML. I'm just specifying JSON. Okay, AWS configuration is done. So my credentials are already provided in this EC2. So let me try to issue this command AWS S3 LS again. So this command will work only if this EC2 is able to establish a connection with S3 service, which is not possible because this EC2 is in a private subnet. Let us see. So you can see that it is actually not giving any output. We can wait for some time and then cancel this command and go ahead. How can we resolve this issue? We can resolve this by creating a VPC endpoint. So let us try to do that. Let this terminal be like this. I'm going to VPC console. Go here, go to VPC endpoint, and if you remember the VPC which we have used here, you can go to the private EC2 and go to network. You can see that we have used the default VPC ending with 173. Okay, so now let us start a endpoint in this VPC, and especially let us start in this private subnet 1. So go to VPC, and then on the left side you can see endpoints, create an endpoint. Okay, so I will say I'm going to create an endpoint for S3. So I will say S3 endpoint 101, and this is a endpoint for an AWS service, and it is asking which AWS service. I'm going to say S3. So it is giving three options. One is for access point, one is for outpost, and this is the normal one. So I'm going to select that. Then it is asking, are you going to create a gateway endpoint or interface endpoint? What I'm going to create is an interface endpoint. So let me select that. I'll do another video with respect to the gateway endpoint and the comparison between these two. So I'm selecting interface endpoint, and it is asking for which VPC. So I will select my default VPC ending with 173. Then it is asking you to select which subnet, in which subnet you want to create the endpoint. Let me select the first one, wherever the private subnet is there. Yeah, private subnet is here. So I'm going to select that private subnet, and one is enough. Either I can create in every subnet so that multiple ENI interfaces will be created, but I'm going to create only in one, and that too in my private subnet. You can create in any of the subnets, that doesn't matter. IP address type IPv4, that is okay. Security group, you just need to have the 443 port. So I already have it here, but when you are doing it, you just ensure that 443 is open. Policy full access means I don't want to restrict access to this endpoint or that particular tunnel face of the tunnel. Tunnel entry point will be open for all. Full access I will give, that is okay. and name S3 endpoint 101. That is correct. So let me create the endpoint. And after you create the endpoint, there is one more configuration need to be changed. So let it come up first. It is still in pending status. You have to wait till it comes in service. Okay, so the S3 endpoint, you can see here that it has come to in service. It is available. So now we need to make a small configuration change. Go to actions and go to modify private DNS name, and here say enable private DNS names. Okay, this second one is not required. Enable private DNS only for inbound endpoint, that is not required. Save changes. Okay, now the S3 endpoint is in available state. We had made a change with respect to the private DNS names. We have enabled it, and after that it has come back to available state. Now go to your terminal and issue the AWS S3 command again to see if it is going to work. This time it should work because the VPC endpoint is now working. So you can see that this VPC endpoint is working, and because of which the private EC2 is able to communicate with the S3 service. So before I close, I will just summarize what we did. So I created two EC2s, one in a public subnet and one in a private subnet. And public subnet EC2 or public EC2 is used as the Bastion host only to log into the private EC2. Otherwise, you will not be able to log into the private EC2. So after you logged into private EC2, we tried to list all my S3 buckets. It failed. It asked for my credentials. So then I used AWS configure and provided my credentials. But when I tried AWS S3 LS once again, it again failed. So that is when we decided to create a VPC endpoint. So we created the VPC endpoint in the same subnet. Actually, you can create in any other subnet of this VPC, but we created in the same subnet, and we created the private link to S3, because when you create the VPC endpoint, it actually asks for what is your target. So you provided S3 as your target service, and because this endpoint already has a private IP address which it gets because of the ENI, automatically, even without any changes to the route table, the messages which are meant for S3, it will automatically land in this particular interface endpoint. Not just S3 LS, there are several other commands which will work with the VPC endpoint. And if you delete that endpoint, again, you will not be able to access S3 from this private EC2. Okay, I hope this video was clear. I'll come back with other useful videos soon. Please consider subscribing to this channel. Thank you. Bye.